Okay, I want you to imagine something for a second. You're waking up in the middle of the night, right? But it's not to an alarm clock. It's to the sudden, sharp, terrifying sound of gunfire. You run to the window, look outside, and your entire neighborhood is literally burning. Families are fleeing in total panic through the streets. All these businesses, places that took decades of blood, sweat, and determination to build, they're just turning to ash right in front of your eyes. And then you look up. There are airplanes flying overhead, just adding to this rapidly spreading chaos. Now, this sounds like a scene from some Hollywood disaster movie, right? Or maybe a foreign war zone, but it's not. This happened right here in America, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, during the summer of 1921. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're uncovering one of the most severe acts of racial violence in American history. It's a profound tragedy that led to a massive loss of life and the near total erasure of an incredibly thriving community. And you know what's really shocking? This entire event was deliberately wiped from our history books for decades. So today, we're going to look closely at the facts, the history, and the aftermath of the Tulsa Race Massacre. Section 1. The Promise of Greenwood. To truly grasp the sheer scale of the tragedy and what was destroyed here, we really have to look first at what was actually built. Okay, let's dive right into this. Because of strict racial segregation during this era, Black Americans were severely limited in where they could live and work. So the residents of a district called Greenwood were basically forced into complete self-sufficiency. And boy, did they deliver. They built a community so prosperous, it became widely known as Black Wall Street. The sheer scale of what they achieved is just remarkable. Within a few short decades, this segregated neighborhood boasted luxury hotels, bustling restaurants, grocery stores, banks, schools, hospitals, you name it. It was full of incredibly successful entrepreneurs. It was basically a thriving microeconomy. Money circulated internally, which meant a dollar spent stayed within Greenwood, helping local businesses just boom. It became one of the wealthiest Black communities in the entire United States. It was a place where kids went to school dreaming of big futures, and families proved that sheer determination could overcome enormous obstacles. But, as history so often shows us, not everyone was happy about this success. Section 2. A Nation Divided. So, to figure out how this incredible, prosperous dream turned into such a nightmare, we really need to zoom out and look at the broader context of 1920s America. The whole country was deeply divided by strict racial segregation. Post-World War I, you had this intense economic uncertainty and a really sharp increase in competition for jobs. And adding a match to this powder keg, white supremacist groups like the Ku Klux Klan were gaining massive influence nationwide. Crucially, you had all these Black veterans returning home from the war. They just fought for their country and, rightfully, expected greater equality. But instead, they faced renewed discrimination and intense hostility. Tulsa was absolutely no exception to this national trend. The city was sitting right on a fault line of racial tension, just bubbling beneath its prosperous surface. Section 3. The Elevator Spark. All that underlying tension, it really just needed one single spark to ignite the whole thing. And that spark happened on May 30th, 1921. Here's what went down. A 19-year-old Black shoe shiner named Dick Rowland got into an elevator operated by a 17-year-old white employee named Sarah Page. So the big question is, what actually happened in that elevator? Well, the historical truth is we don't know for sure. There was absolutely zero clear evidence of any assault. Historians note that Rowland might have accidentally stepped on Page's foot, making her scream, or maybe she was just startled when he stumbled. But honestly, the actual facts didn't matter one bit to the rumor mill that immediately fired up. Let's move through the timeline and see how this rapidly builds into an uncontrollable crisis. We start on May 30th with the elevator incident. By the very next day, May 31st, a local newspaper published these highly sensationalized headlines falsely implying an attack. That evening, an angry white crowd quickly gathered outside the courthouse where Rowland was being held. This raised immediate, terrifying fears of a lynching. Remember, lynchings were distressingly common at this time, and the Black community knew this threat was entirely real. This rapid escalation leads us right into the dawn of June 1st and the unthinkable invasion of Greenwood.
Section 4. The Night of Fire. Determined to prevent a lynching, a group of armed Black veterans actually went to the courthouse to offer protection for Rowland, but officials rejected their help. So they returned later that evening as the white mob just grew significantly larger and more agitated.
During this incredibly tense standoff, someone tried to disarm one of the Black men, and a gunshot rang out. We still don't know who fired first, but within seconds, absolute chaos exploded. After a fierce exchange of gunfire, the outnumbered black defenders had to retreat toward Greenwood, and the armed white mob pursued them. As dawn broke, hundreds and then thousands of armed attackers invaded Greenwood. Homes were looted, buildings were set on fire, and in one of the most shocking historical details of this entire massacre, eyewitnesses reported private airplanes flying overhead. They weren't just observing, they were dropping incendiary devices and firing weapons straight down onto the community below. The devastation was rapid, it was systematic, and it was absolute. By the time the violence finally ended, 35 entire city blocks of Greenwood had been completely destroyed by fire. More than 1,200 homes were just gone. Churches, schools, libraries, hospitals, all reduced to ashes. Thousands of people were suddenly left completely homeless, forced to flee for their lives into fields and forests, carrying literally only what they could hold in their hands. And then, of course, there's the massive human cost. While official reports at the time drastically downplayed the numbers, modern historical research estimates that as many as 300 people were killed in the violence. 300. Section 5. The silent aftermath. Now, perhaps the most shocking part of this history isn't even just the violence itself. It's what was deliberately hidden after the smoke finally cleared over Tulsa. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of the historical erasure. When you compare the official 1921 reports to modern historical estimates, the contrast is just staggering. At the time, officials listed around 36 deaths. Today, we know the estimate is closer to 300, with many victims quickly and quietly placed in unmarked mass graves. Officials intentionally minimized the event by legally labeling it a riot rather than a massacre. And in terms of justice, 0 convictions for the destruction of Greenwood. Nothing. Instead, we got decades of deliberate silence and cover-ups. The injustice didn't stop when the fires were put out either. Instead of receiving help, thousands of black residents, the actual victims of all this violence, were arrested and held in detention centers. They were only let go if a white citizen vouched for them. Meanwhile, insurance companies flat out refused to pay claims for the destroyed properties, exploiting the fact that local officials had conveniently labeled the whole thing a riot. So in the span of just 24 hours, families were unjustly detained and systematically stripped of their life savings and generations of hard-earned wealth. Gone overnight. Section 6. Why we must remember. For decades, this tragedy got almost no attention at all. Survivors rarely spoke of it out of deep trauma and fear. Schools completely ignored it. History books literally omitted the whole thing. It was as if an entire chapter of American history was just purposefully wiped clean. Which brings us to today. It took many, many decades, but historians, journalists, survivors, and community leaders have finally broken that silence to uncover the truth. Today, active investigations are examining those mass grave sites to finally give the victims some dignity. Hidden documents have been rediscovered to set the record straight. And crucially, survivor testimonies have been preserved to ensure the memories of Greenwood do not vanish again. Look, preserving this uncomfortable history is absolutely vital. Remembering this isn't about reopening old wounds. It's about understanding our past with clear eyes so that future generations can build a truly just and informed society. The story of Greenwood was originally a story of tremendous hope, built through immense determination. And even though it was met with unimaginable tragedy, the survivors carried their history forward anyway. Today, the Tulsa Race Massacre stands as a really powerful reminder that history is shaped by both triumphs and tragedies, and we have to commit to remembering both. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought to consider. Will we let uncomfortable history be forgotten again? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. If you learned something new today, consider sharing this history so the lives, the dreams, and the legacy of Greenwood are never erased again.